She said, "I can file your papers, or mess them up." Little did I know, she was about to mess with my heart. The morning light filtered softly through the blinds, casting a warm, almost intimate glow over the office. It was just another typical day for him, a young, ambitious man starting his first job at a prestigious firm, but there was something different about today. He could feel it in the air, an inexplicable tension, as if the world had shifted slightly on its axis. He entered the office, the sound of his footsteps sharp against the polished floors. His gaze swept over the quiet room, finally landing on her, a woman whose presence seemed to command the space. She was seated at her desk, focused, poised, the very picture of professionalism. Her eyes flicked up as he entered, and for a moment, their gazes met. She was older than him by nearly 20 years, graceful, yet undeniably attractive, radiating a confidence that was both intimidating and alluring. But it was her eyes that drew him in, not just the exterior. They were filled with a certain calmness, a depth that suggested experience, wisdom, and maybe even a hint of something more, a vulnerability he could sense beneath the surface. "Can I help you?" Her voice was steady, authoritative, yet somehow warm, like a woman who had nothing to prove and yet, everything to offer. He found himself momentarily at a loss for words, caught off guard by the intensity of her gaze. His heart gave a quick flutter as he remembered the task at hand. He was supposed to drop off a report, a simple, mundane task that would have been unremarkable if not for the way she made everything feel different. "Here's the report you asked for," he said, his voice betraying the slight nervousness he felt. He handed her the file, his fingers brushing lightly against hers. It was just a fleeting touch, but in that instant, time seemed to stretch. He could feel the warmth of her skin, the subtle electricity that sparked between them. Her eyes flickered to the contact, and for the briefest moment, he thought he saw something shift in her, an acknowledgement of the touch, a flicker of something deeper beneath the surface. She smiled, but it was quick, controlled, almost as if she were hiding something. She didn't say anything about it, but there was a certain tension in the air now, unspoken, yet palpable. "Thanks," she said, her voice back to its usual calm tone. "I'll take it from here." He nodded, swallowing the sudden lump in his throat, before quickly turning to leave. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had just changed. He had always been aware of his attraction to her, there was no denying her beauty and presence, but now, there was something more. A connection, however brief, had been made, and neither of them could ignore it. The tension lingered in the air long after he left her office, a quiet whisper of something that neither of them were ready to confront. Yet, they both knew it was only a matter of time before the unspoken would have to be addressed. Weeks passed, and the days in the office began to blur together, yet every moment spent with her felt like it was charged with something unspoken, but undeniable. The male protagonist, still adjusting to the routine of his new job, found himself becoming acutely aware of her every move. She was always at the center of the office, a pillar of confidence and control. But over time, he started noticing the little things that no one else seemed to pay attention to, the subtle changes in her expression, the way her gaze lingered a fraction too long, the way she would soften when their conversations took a personal turn, even if only for a moment. The unspoken tension between them grew with every encounter. At first, it was the little things, a hand brushing against the back of her chair as he passed, the brief moment of eye contact when they exchanged documents. Those fleeting touches, those split-second glances, seemed so innocent in isolation, but together, they formed a pattern, an undeniable connection that neither of them could ignore. The office became a battleground of suppressed emotions. During meetings, she would speak with the same professional poise, but there was a subtle warmth in her tone when addressing him. She would often glance in his direction, her eyes meeting his with just enough intensity to leave him wondering if there was more to the look than simple workplace politeness. Her voice, when it addressed him directly, would carry an undertone of something deeper, something raw and real, buried beneath her usual professional exterior. He found himself becoming increasingly distracted by these small moments, unable to shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something neither of them was ready to confront. There were times when he would catch her staring at him for just a beat too long, her lips slightly parted, as if she was about to say something, but the words never came. Instead, she would look away, redirecting her focus, perhaps to avoid the temptation of addressing what lay between them. He couldn't help but feel that she was struggling with the same internal conflict, attraction and hesitation, desire and restraint. One evening, as he stayed late to finish up some work, the office grew quieter. The others had gone home, leaving him and her alone in the space. She stood up from her desk, walking over to his station, her heels clicking softly on the floor, the sound amplified in the stillness of the office. She handed him a stack of papers, and their fingers brushed again, this time longer, deliberate. Neither of them pulled away immediately. She paused, her gaze softening for just a second before she cleared her throat, retreating back to her desk. He stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the moment settling over him. There was no mistaking it now, this was more than just professional. The connection between them was tangible, undeniable. But neither of them was willing to cross that line just yet. Instead, they continued to exist in this charged, unspoken tension, knowing that one way or another, it would all have to come to the surface soon. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when fate decided to intervene. He had stopped by his usual cafe, hoping for a quiet hour with his thoughts and a steaming cup of coffee. But as soon as he stepped inside, he spotted her, sitting at a corner table, a book in her hands. She looked different outside of the office. The usually crisp, professional demeanor was replaced by something softer, something real. Her shoulders were relaxed, her lips slightly curved into a small smile as she read, lost in her world. She was alone, and there was a quiet vulnerability about her that he had never seen before. He hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to approach. But something inside him urged him to go over. The tension between them at work was undeniable, but this was different. This was a chance to see her as a person, not just a figure of authority. Taking a deep breath, he walked over, his heart racing for reasons he couldn't fully explain. She looked up as he approached, surprise flickering in her eyes before it softened into a genuine smile. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, her voice carrying the same warmth it did in the office, but now there was no wall of professionalism between them. It felt human. Real. "I wasn't expecting to see you either," he said, standing awkwardly for a moment before she gestured to the empty seat across from her. "Sit down. Join me," she offered. He sat, their conversation flowing more easily than it ever had in the office. They spoke about work at first, of course, but it was the way they spoke, more freely, with none of the usual barriers. She laughed softly at one of his jokes, the sound rich and unguarded. There was something incredibly disarming about seeing her this way, her usually guarded, composed self now giving way to a more genuine, relaxed version of who she truly was. Her laugh felt like music to his ears, and her eyes, so often filled with quiet authority, were now filled with something more, something that made his heart skip. As they talked, he found himself drawn to the depth in her eyes. She wasn't just a boss, a mentor, a colleague, she was a woman who had lived through things, who had stories etched into her skin, wisdom behind those gentle lines. She spoke candidly about her life, her challenges, and the decisions she'd made that had shaped her. In turn, he began to open up as well. Something about the atmosphere, the warm glow of the cafe, and her unexpected vulnerability made him feel safer, safer than he had in the office, where the walls between them had always seemed higher. She listened, really listened, and for the first time, he allowed himself to feel heard. As the conversation slowed, she shifted slightly in her seat, her hand brushing against his arm by accident. He could feel the warmth of her skin, the subtle pressure of her touch, and for a moment, neither of them pulled away. The air between them felt charged, the kind of quiet tension that suggested something more. He caught her gaze, and for the first time, she didn't look away. They sat in the stillness for a heartbeat, both silently acknowledging the unspoken bond growing between them. And then, just as quickly, the moment passed. She smiled, her hand retreating back to her side. "I guess we should get back," she said, her voice light again. But there was a certain softness there now, something that wasn't there before. He smiled back, feeling a warmth he couldn't quite place. This was no longer just about attraction. This was something deeper, something real. And it scared him in the best way possible. The days following their chance encounter at the cafe were filled with a new kind of unease. While the conversation between them had felt easy, the shift in their dynamic lingered in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. The professional distance they'd carefully maintained at the office seemed increasingly fragile, a thin veil between them that was on the verge of tearing. Each time they exchanged a glance, it was different, charged, filled with the weight of something they couldn't yet name. And every time they spoke, there was a subtle hesitation in their voices, as though they were both holding back, fighting against an undeniable pull. He'd catch her looking at him with those quiet eyes that once seemed cool and distant but now held something warmer, something searching. The look would linger just a beat too long before she'd look away, quickly focusing on something else. And he would do the same, turning his gaze back to his work, pretending it didn't matter, pretending he hadn't noticed the flicker of something deeper between them. It was late one evening when things finally reached a breaking point. He was staying late to finish a report, as was often the case in the beginning of a new job. The office was nearly empty, save for the soft hum of computers and the occasional click of a mouse. He thought he was alone, lost in his work, until he heard the soft sound of footsteps approaching. She appeared in the doorway of his cubicle, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of the hallway lights. He looked up, startled for a moment, and his heart gave an involuntary lurch in his chest. She was holding a stack of files, but there was something about her presence that made the air feel thicker, more intense than it had before. "I need your help with something," she said, her voice steady but quieter than usual. He nodded, his throat suddenly dry. "Of course, what do you need?" She set the files down on his desk and leaned in slightly, her fingers brushing against the edge of the paper. It was the closest they'd been in weeks, and the proximity felt suffocating, heavy with everything they had both been avoiding. He could feel the heat of her body just inches away from his, could hear the soft rhythm of her breathing, steady but carrying a tension he couldn't ignore. As he reached for the papers, their hands brushed again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just an accidental touch, it was deliberate, intentional, as if she had meant for it to happen. The spark of warmth that rushed through him was immediate, electric, and he froze, unable to pull away. She lingered for a moment too, her fingers grazing his lightly, before slowly pulling her hand back. There was a moment of silence between them. He looked up at her, meeting her eyes, and in that instant, it was as if everything else in the room disappeared. He could see the vulnerability there now, the quiet internal struggle that mirrored his own. But then she blinked, and the moment passed. She cleared her throat, standing up a little straighter. "I'll leave you to it," she said, her voice now distant, professional again, like the walls were suddenly back in place. As she turned and walked away, he watched her go, a sinking feeling settling in his chest. The walls between them were still there, still thick with tension. But for a moment, they had both let them slip, just a little. It was a fleeting, fragile thing, but he knew that soon, the silence between them would no longer be enough to keep everything buried. The weeks of unspoken tension between them had reached a boiling point, and neither could ignore it any longer. Every glance, every touch, every lingering silence felt like a silent cry for something more, something real. She could feel the weight of it, the heavy air between them whenever their paths crossed in the office. He, too, was no longer able to pretend that it was just professional. The walls they had both carefully constructed had begun to crumble under the weight of the emotions neither was willing to confront, but both knew were there. It was late again, after the office had quieted down and most of the staff had gone home. The soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of a phone ringing from a far-off cubicle filled the otherwise silent office. She had stayed behind to finish some paperwork, though she had never been one to shy away from staying late when needed. But tonight, it wasn't just the work that kept her there, it was him. There was a conversation that had to happen, and she could no longer keep putting it off. She stood up, walking toward his desk with purpose. Her heels clicked against the floor, and he looked up just in time to meet her eyes. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them, something neither of them could hide anymore. She had never been one to shy away from confrontation, and she wasn't about to let fear hold her back now. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual, a vulnerability she hadn't shown before creeping in. He swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. He had been waiting for this moment, though he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. The weight of the silence that had built between them felt unbearable now. He nodded, his throat tight with anticipation. "Of course," he replied, his voice steadier than he felt. She motioned to the chair across from him, and she sat down slowly, folding her hands in her lap as she stared at the desk for a moment, collecting her thoughts. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. He watched her, the lines of her face softer now, no longer holding the iron grip of authority she usually had in the office. She seemed human, in a way he had never allowed himself to see her before. It was a strange, intimate feeling, one that made his heart race. Finally, she spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "I don't know how to say this, but I think we both know that there's something between us. Something more than just work. I've been trying to ignore it, but every time I look at you, every time you look at me, it's like I can't breathe without thinking about it." His heart skipped a beat. Her words, her honesty, were like a release he hadn't even realized he needed. He had been holding his breath for so long, trying to find a way to say something without making things awkward, without overstepping. But she had beaten him to it. She had spoken the truth, the raw, unfiltered truth that had been lingering between them all along. "I feel the same," he said, his voice low but sure. He leaned forward slightly, his heart pounding in his chest. "I've been trying to deny it, too. But it's there, and it's hard to ignore." She met his gaze then, her eyes searching his with an intensity that made him feel as if he were being seen for the first time, truly seen. She didn't look away, and neither did he. For a long moment, the air between them was heavy, charged with all the words they hadn't said yet, all the things they hadn't allowed themselves to feel. Then, slowly, she reached out and placed her hand on the desk between them. It was a small gesture, but to him, it felt like the world had shifted. He reached out without thinking, his fingers brushing hers, and for the first time, there was no hesitation. No distance. Just the simple connection of two people who had been waiting for the right moment to admit what they both knew all along. "I'm scared," she said softly, breaking the silence. "Scared of what this could mean. Scared of how it will change things." He nodded, his own fear mirrored in her words. "I'm scared too. But maybe we don't have to have all the answers right now." Her hand tightened around his, a small but powerful gesture of trust. "Maybe not," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But we can take it one step at a time." For the first time in weeks, the silence between them didn't feel suffocating, it felt like a beginning. The walls that had separated them for so long were finally starting to come down. And in that moment, neither of them felt alone. The weight of their shared feelings had built to an almost unbearable point, each moment of tension between them growing heavier, more difficult to ignore. The office, which had once felt like a safe, professional space, now seemed to carry an undercurrent of something deeper. Every glance, every smile, every moment of proximity was thick with the unsaid. It was no longer a question of, if, they would confront the chemistry between them, it was a question of, when. It was a Friday evening, and the office was quieter than usual. The last few workers had gone home, leaving only the hum of the air conditioning and the soft buzz of their own thoughts. She had stayed late once again, her eyes tired from hours of staring at a computer screen. The usual sense of control she exuded seemed to slip a little more with each passing day, and tonight, the vulnerability she had carefully concealed for so long felt like it was about to spill over. He hadn't planned on staying late. In fact, he had been about to leave when she caught his eye across the room. Her gaze was softer than usual, and the corners of her mouth were turned down slightly, as if she were lost in thought, uncertain of what to say. But her eyes, they always gave her away. They were searching his, as if asking for something, seeking something unspoken. He couldn't look away. There was something magnetic about the way she stared at him, something almost pleading. The walls between them, which had once felt so solid, were now crumbling under the weight of their shared understanding. His heart beat faster in his chest as he slowly walked toward her. "Can we talk?" Her voice, though still calm and professional, held an unmistakable edge of vulnerability he hadn't heard before. He nodded, his throat tight with anticipation. "Of course." She gestured to the chair across from her, and he took a seat, the space between them feeling smaller than ever before. There was a palpable shift in the air, an electricity that hung just beneath the surface. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke, simply watching each other. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, she spoke again, her voice quieter now, almost as if she were trying to protect herself from the weight of her own words. "I need to say something, something I've been avoiding for weeks." She paused, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I've been trying to ignore the way I feel, trying to pretend that this, whatever this is, doesn't matter. But it does. I can't ignore it anymore." He leaned forward slightly, his pulse quickening. "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready." But she shook her head, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite name, fear, desire, something that mirrored his own feelings. "No," she whispered, almost to herself. "I think I've been waiting for you to say it first." His heart stilled for a moment. "Say what?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She met his gaze, her eyes vulnerable but steady. "That you feel it too," she confessed. "That there's something between us. Something real." For the first time in their relationship, the truth hung between them, heavy and undeniable. He didn't have to think about his response. His feelings had been building, but they had also been clear from the moment they met. "I do," he said softly, but with certainty. "I've been feeling it for a while now, but I didn't want to make things complicated." A small, almost imperceptible sigh of relief escaped her lips. She leaned back slightly in her chair, her eyes searching his as if trying to gauge the depth of his honesty. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Scared of what this could mean for us, for our careers. But I don't want to hide from it anymore." He reached across the desk, his hand gently brushing hers. The contact was soft but electric, a silent promise of understanding. "We'll figure it out," he said quietly. "Together." The quietness between them was no longer filled with uncertainty. It was full of something else now, something warm, something hopeful. She looked down at their hands, then back up at him, her gaze filled with something deeper than before, trust. Acceptance. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something more than either of them had dared to dream. For the first time in weeks, they both allowed themselves to breathe freely, to let the vulnerability in, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. The following morning, the office felt different, lighter, somehow, despite the usual hum of activity and the bustle of phone calls and emails. There was a quiet shift in the air, an unspoken understanding between them that hadn't been there before. What had once felt like a barrier between their professional selves and the connection they shared now seemed to have faded, leaving something more real in its place. They no longer had to pretend that their bond was nothing more than casual interaction. It was something deeper, something meaningful, even if they hadn't fully figured out what that meant yet. She arrived early, as she always did, but today, her walk into the office felt more relaxed. There was no rush, no tension in her steps. She smiled slightly as she passed by his desk, and for the first time, it wasn't a brief, polite smile, it was genuine. He looked up from his computer, meeting her gaze, and the silence between them no longer held the weight of doubt. Instead, it was filled with something else, quiet acknowledgement, mutual respect, and a subtle warmth that neither of them had been brave enough to show before. They had both spoken their truths the night before, and now, in the light of day, it felt like a new chapter. It wasn't dramatic, no sweeping declarations or grand gestures, it was the simple, quiet understanding that things were changing between them, that they were both willing to step into the unknown together. The office didn't need to know everything about their shift in relationship, and honestly, neither of them wanted to make it into something it wasn't. It was enough that they knew, enough that they had begun to let themselves be seen by one another. The first exchange of the morning was casual, like any other. She passed by his desk, handing him a file. As she did, her fingers brushed his, a small but intentional gesture that sent a shiver of warmth through him. The moment wasn't lost on either of them, but neither spoke of it. Instead, they both continued with their work, as if that simple touch had already said everything they needed to say. Later, they found themselves in a meeting, sitting across from one another at the conference table. Their colleague spoke, but neither of them seemed to notice the noise. They were aware of each other in a way that felt new, every look, every pause in conversation, a silent understanding that the dynamic had shifted. After the meeting, she found him in the break room, pouring coffee into a cup. He had been about to leave, but something stopped him. There was something in the way she had looked at him, something open, something inviting. He lingered. "You doing all right?" she asked, her voice low, her smile warm. He nodded, a small but sincere smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah. I think I'm starting to figure it out." She raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "That I'm glad we talked," he said, the words coming out more easily now, like they had been sitting on the tip of his tongue for a long time. "I'm glad we didn't keep pretending." She looked at him for a long moment, and in her eyes, he saw the same sense of relief, the same shift in her understanding of what they were. It was no longer a secret or something to hide away. It was real, and it was theirs. Slowly, she placed her cup down on the counter and stepped closer, her hand brushing against his arm in a gesture so natural that it felt like it had always been there. "I'm glad, too," she whispered. "Let's just take it one step at a time." And in that moment, everything that had been uncertain, the doubts, the fears, melted away. They didn't have all the answers, and they didn't need them. They had each other, and for now, that was enough. It wasn't the grand, sweeping romance they had imagined in their heads. It was simpler than that. It was honest. It was real. And it was just the beginning. As the morning continued and the office returned to its usual rhythm, they both knew that things had changed. They had stepped into something new, something that felt right, even if it was just beginning to take shape. The connection they shared had been nurtured in silence, in small moments, and now, it was ready to unfold. They both smiled, knowing that, together, they would navigate this new path, one step at a time.